Now to use our slice, we first of all need to use the return value of calling createSlice. Because here we get back our counter slice. Now this name is up to you, but it's a slice of our global state, the slice which is responsible for working with our counter. Now we want to register this with our store. So first of all, we can get rid of our old counter reducer here. We don't need that anymore. So let's remove it to make this a bit more readable. And now here to create store, we could pass our counter slice dot reducer. With that, we get access to the reducers set up in the slice. Even though it's dot reducer, it's basically a big reducer with a couple of if statements that trigger those different reducer methods depending on the action type, and we would be good to go. We just couldn't dispatch actions right now, but in theory, we would be good to go like this. But if we have bigger applications with multiple state slices, we would face a problem if we try to do it like this, because there can only be one reducer passed to create store, and when we have multiple slices, we have multiple reducers, which we access with dot reducer on the different slices. Now with standard Redux, there is a combine reducers function, which we could use for that, but we can also ditch Redux here and instead import another function from Redux.js Toolkit, which will make that a bit easier. We can import the configure store function. Configure store, like create store, creates a store, but it makes merging multiple reducers into one reducer easier thereafter. So here we can now call configure store, and to configure store we now pass an object, not a reducer function but an object. It's a configuration object expected by configure store. A configuration object where we then set a reducer property, and that's an expected property by configure store. Reducer, singular, and not reducers, plural, because still, no matter if we use create store or configure store, Redux wants one main reducer function, which is responsible for the global state. However, with configure store, the value for reducer can be a single reducer. So we can, for example, use counter slice dot reducer to use the reducer from that counter slice, which combines all those reducer methods defined in that slice. We can use that as a global main reducer. And here that would make sense because this is the only state slice we have and therefore the only reducer we have. But if we had multiple state slices in a bigger application, something we're going to see later, then alternatively, as a value for this reducer key, we could also set an object, and in that object we can set up any keys of our choice, so any property names of our choice, and the values of those properties would then be different reducer functions. So we would create a map of reducers, you could say. And this map is then set as a value for the main reducer, and behind the scenes, configure store will merge all those reducers into one big reducer. So it will merge them for us. And that's an alternative we can use, not an alternative we will use here though, because here we only have one reducer, so we can directly assign that reducer from the counter slice as our main reducer for configure store. Now the question is, how do we dispatch actions? Because we don't have our own if checks, we don't know what the identifiers for our actions should be. We just have these method names, but how do we now know what to dispatch?